I would like to call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Des Moines Public Schools to order on June 19th, 2018. Please take the roll.
Natasha Newcomb.
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle Shelley.
Here.
Ms. Langford.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn.
Here.
Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Barron.
Here.
The first item I have on the agenda this evening is approval of the agenda. Are there any special requests? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from Anderson to approve the agenda. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for the June 5th board meeting. May I have a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion from De La Gardelle Shelley and a second from Natasha Newcomb. Any discussion or corrections? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 7-0. We'll now move to district recognitions.
Good evening, Board. As you know, over the past several years, Des Moines Public Schools has been doing more and more to support the health and well-being of our students. From the food we serve to physical activities, these changes have come about thanks not only to the work of our teachers and staff, but also because of the support of numerous partners. One of those partners is the American Heart Association and their Jump Rope for Heart event. This campaign combines exercise and fundraising as a way to help physical education. Here with us this evening to share a little more about how our schools took part in Jump Rope for Heart is Karen Kelly, the Midwest Youth Market Director for the American Heart Association. Karen also has some guests with her for a presentation to a couple of our schools. Karen, if you'd please come up and share a little bit more about this initiative. Welcome.
Well, good evening. My name is Karen Kelly. I'm the Youth Market Director for the American Heart Association. Appreciate you guys giving me some time on your agenda tonight. As was mentioned, I came here to acknowledge and show appreciation for many of your schools in your district that participated with our programs this year. So many of you probably know that this generation of kids is expected to live 5 years less than their parents' generation. And this is a combination of poor nutrition and decreased physical activity, which has led to this trend. So because of what the teachers and students in the Des Moines Public School District, what they're doing, they're making an impact. They're helping to change these trends. And one way that they're helping do that is through the American Heart Association's Jump Rope for Heart program. So during this program, they reinforce the message of getting 60 minutes of physical activity every single day, teaching the students to reduce their sodium consumption, talking about eating a fruit or vegetable with every single meal, staying away from tobacco, and choosing water over sugary sweetened beverages. These teachers make it fun, they make it relatable for the students, and empower the students to make heart health a priority. And in addition to the health messages, they also are inspiring the students to help others through fundraising. So on behalf of the American Heart Association, I want to go ahead and just take a few moments to recognize the following schools that participated this year and for their support. So Brody Middle School, Brubaker Elementary, Coles Montessori, the Downtown School, Edmonds Elementary, Finley, Garton, Hannawalt, Howe, Hubble, Jackson, Jefferson, McKinley, Monroe, Morris Elementary, Moulton, Park Avenue, River Woods, Stowe, Walnut Street School, and Wright Elementary. So as you can see, we had quite a few that participated and shared in that heart healthy message with the kids and their families. So now I want to introduce Maddie Short. She's going to talk just a moment about some CPR kits that we have been able to sponsor for some schools in the district.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us. My name is Maddie Short, as Karen said, and I'm our Heartball Director here in Des Moines. One of the goals of the American Heart Association is to build heart-healthy communities, which we are really proud of and really excited about. And one of the ways we do that is partnering with schools by delivering CPR kits, not only for the students to learn CPR, but also for the staff. We've found that over 50% of people who experience a cardiac arrest don't actually receive bystander CPR, and time is muscle. So it's critical that people are trained in the life-saving efforts of CPR. We've also found that kids ages 16 to 22 are 3 times more likely to perform CPR on a bystander than their adult counterparts. So we found that when we're training kids in high school, that they are much more likely to participate in CPR than their adult counterparts. The way we were able to do this is we actually had an incredible partnership and a sponsor in Arion. They're a Des Moines-based company, and they committed to not 1 but 2 CPR kits in schools this year at Orchard Place and at Scavo. And so we wanted to recognize them and thank them for their incredible support. We wouldn't be able to do this without them, and so I wanted to introduce Dan Miller from Arion.
Hi, my name is Dan Miller. I am a business partner at Arion, and we are committed to investing in the health and wellness of not only our employees, but the community that we live in. And so we partner regularly with the American Heart Association, and we are very excited for the opportunity to sponsor, as Maddie mentioned, not 1 but 2 of these kits for Scavo and for the Orchard Place, and we hope that it helps to empower our youth to save lives in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
And for our second recognition tonight, we would like to start off with a brief video. So Kyle, if you could please roll the tape.
So Deb, you probably wondered why we have 3 people seated in the front, 4 people seated in the first and second row on the left, but we wanted to make sure tonight was not only special for you, but also filled with a few surprises. So those are yet to come, and I'll invite former board members forward to make a few comments and to help us share with Deb our well wishes as she moves into retirement.
Hi, Deb. What a nice tribute from all of you. I'm Gloria Hoffman. I served on the board for 12 years, from 1983 to 95. And after almost 23 years off the board, You do not always remember all of the staff, I can assure you, but I will never forget Deb. She was a constant help, always a joy to work with. And we have remained friends these many years, and I hope we can continue to remain friends and that you have a wonderful retirement.
All right, I'm class of 1990 through, and then I, for some reason, loved this job and came back in 2000 to serve again. Deb and school board members, something's never changed, and when I think of this school district, certainly the words of Marion Wright Edelman, be good to me, the sea is so wide, and my boat is so small. And Deb, over the years, we've been through some challenges, and I think my colleagues will attest to many of them. And Deb has been the steadfast anchor for us through some of those challenges, including the longest governmental meeting in history in 1996, when we went 8 hours.
Oh, my.
And planning and zoning was a little leery of appointing me chair because of that, but that's okay. I've redeemed myself. But Deb, you truly have been the person that has been somebody I think that school board members would say, no matter what challenges we had, no matter what issues that we faced, you were always a person that, you know, we'll be okay, we'll get through this. And to have you sitting at the board table with us was also very important. And so going back to my friend Marion Wright Edelman, this is how I hope you remember and how I will remember your time with us. We must not, in trying to think about how we can make a big difference, ignore the small daily differences that we make, which over time add up to big differences that we cannot often foresee. Thank you so much, Deb.
Jane Hine, 3832 Park Avenue. I meant to make sure I got that on there. This is a pleasure, Deb, to be here for you. We put out a call to some of our other school board members, and of course, some are out of the country, and some had other places that they needed to be tonight, but everybody was in agreement that they wanted to praise you and thank you sincerely for the time that you gave us. When I was on the board, we had the opportunity to pass the 1-cent sales tax for schools. And I know you were an integral part in helping us keep a lot of those things together. And Deb, as you go into your retirement, remember, you have so many, many more abilities to give. As one door closes, another door opens, and I hope that you will stay in our community and remain active. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for everything you did for us.
We went in order of time served, so I am the newest former member, 2003 to 2017. Nice to see all of you. It's kind of different to be on this side. Connie Bozen. Deb, I can't say enough for all the things you've done, not only at the board, but for the foundation board too, and really stuck through. I've never heard you raise your voice, and there probably were plenty of opportunities that you might want to. Your calmness, your patience, your kindness, your thoroughness, and getting us through many different things can't be stated enough, as it's been stated tonight. So, as one of the former board members and former chairs, and for those who have served as chair, know the extra work that goes into that and the extra work that Deb puts in to help us do well. So again, thank you for all your service and thank you for all your work. And I know you do like flowers, so I did stop. There might be a few, but on behalf of your work, here's one for you.
Thanks, Connie. Yeah.
Okay, Deb, I have one thing in common. I just announced I'm retiring also, so yes.
Get out of town,
We
no
might-
way.
So anyway, it's kind of a nice feeling. I think Deb probably feels that way too. So on to other things. I have a few other things to do, but
Great.
thanks, Terry.
Well, thank you all for being here. Special night for Deb, and I wanted to just share that I think it's hard to believe that this is actually your last meeting with this board and as a member of the DMPS team, Deb. But I think it's safe to say that during your time with this district and during your tenure with the board, you have attended in excess of 850 board meetings, work sessions, special meetings or committee meetings, and probably more. I tried to do a quick calculation in my head. Distributed and developed over 1,000 board packets and committee meeting agendas, approved and produced tens of thousands of pages of meeting minutes, logged an infinite number of hours behind a desk using either a typewriter at one point and now a computer, worked during the tenure of 5 superintendents, and most closely with our current superintendent and 2 previous superintendents, and supported the needs of over 50 board members and countless members of boards and commissions across the district. Suffice it to say, you are indeed our institutional knowledge, the glue that keeps us together, either in front of the camera or behind the scenes, the person that makes us, especially me when I'm serving as chair, look really good and act like I have my act together. And then finally, I'd like to share that your gentle prodding, your calm demeanor, your ability to either anticipate our needs or steer us in the right direction has been absolutely invaluable. It's hard to believe that you will not be at our next board meeting, sitting next to me and at the table with the other board members, preparing our next board packet, or supporting us with travel, snacks, meals, handling our board doc entries, and training us or addressing our technology challenges, our email, and our login opportunities, which we've had many of. So, Deb, in so many ways, your retirement marks the end of an era. And it's really important that we acknowledge not only the amazing work that you have done during your 30 years with the district, but also the incredible level of support that you have given boards both in the past and current. There are lots of notes that I know that you have filed, and I know that the transition is going to be smooth because I know how organized you are. So I know the files are probably organized perfectly, or if not, they're going to get there. And all of your processes and procedures are probably documented to a T as well, because I know you. So on behalf of the board, if you could join me down here, we have just a couple of things that we would like to give you. We definitely want to acknowledge the amazing work that you've done. And so this is just a small plaque with gratitude for your years of dedicated service to Des Moines Public Schools, 1987 to 2018. So enjoy that. More flowers for you. And then, because we know that there may be times when you may want to take yourself out to lunch or get a massage or just enjoy life in retirement, just a small token of our appreciation, Deb, just to let you know how much you are admired, how much you are appreciated, and how much you are loved. So thank you so much.
Don't know how I get choked up when things like this happen and I can't talk. Very unprepared. And I see a couple special people over there. It has been a very incredible journey for me. I think about where I started and you talk about being organized and the person I interviewed with was Dr. Jim Wise, which some of you probably remember, and he was involved with countless things and committees and groups, and was describing some of these things as we interviewed. And one of the questions I asked him was how much lead time he gave me to prepare things for all these meetings and committees and groups that he worked with, and he kind of chuckled. And I understood why, and somehow we made it work. I think he knew then that I had a read on him already. So it's just been amazing to work with all the people through all the years, and I've really enjoyed it, and I will miss everyone. And thank you all so much.
Thanks, Deb. Thank you all for being here. Before continuing with our regular meeting, I want to remind the audience that we allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information table to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among the board members at the board table, while speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. We appreciate your input. Ms. Langford, I believe that you have the consent motion.
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the acting board secretary in the amount of $5,073,605.32, and procurement card transactions in the amount of $869,038.72.
Is there a second? We have a motion from Langford and a second from Anderson. Is there any discussion on any consent item? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item number E1, open enrollment late applications for denial. I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter.
Per state code, there is an open enrollment application deadline. Under special circumstances, late applications can be accepted. Those on the agenda tonight are those late applications that did not meet the exceptions.
We have one speaker on this item, Franklin Ewers. Please come and state your name and address for the record. Sorry for the pronunciation.
Oh, no worries. I'm used to it. My name is Franklin Ewers. I live at 6820 Starview Street in Des Moines. Good evening, board members, superintendent. I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time to hear my concerns. My son is enrolled at Studebaker Elementary School. He's a kind-hearted and loving kid. He can be described as an old soul and always puts others' feelings first. He loves school very much. However, over the last 2 years, that has diminished. My son comes home from school upset and crying. I ask him 2 questions every day. The first is, how was your day, son? The second is, what did you learn? The first question started causing me concern when he would answer it was a bad day. With this answer, he would cry and say he was upset. We would talk about what happened, and I would address those concerns. We would also discuss how he could avoid these instances and what he could do to get away. It is disheartening and incredibly frustrating to see your child that once was happy and enjoyed going to school, to become a child that hates it, especially as a first grader. Some of these instances that he has had to endure include, but are not limited to, a child turning off the computer multiple times while my son was working on taking, I believe it's called the Lexia course. 2 children taking a ball from my son while following and taunting him as he was trying to walk away as instructed by me and his mother and teachers. Pushing, shoving, name-calling. And he was also threatened by a child that said, "I'm going to hit you with the teacher's book," 2 days after this child was addressed by the principal. We have just let him problem solve and work with his teachers and the educators to resolve the issues with our help and guidance. But now it is getting escalated to where it's beginning to affect his education and experiences within the classroom. This child is not only bullying children, but he gathers other kids to follow his lead that are too scared to stand up to him and tell him no. So it is becoming an even bigger issue for my son. He has told the teachers when instances occur, and my wife and I have contacted the principal with these instances. We did agree of a solution to separating the main instigator, who is a known issue to the school, into a different classroom in the upcoming school year. However, after my child was threatened, in careful consideration, I am confident that this will not stop the issue due to this child's followers, and there's a large chance that my child and this child will still have to interact with one another as well as the child's followers. My son is trained in martial arts and is taught there and at home to control his emotions and temper. He controls his stress level and protects his mind. He can find happiness in any situation and walk away until there is too pervasive of a threat that he cannot walk away. The kid was threatened and was able to walk away, and for that I am proud. If I were to say to anybody as an adult that I would hit you with an object, I would spend time speaking with the Des Moines Police Department. This has been escalating and going for the past 2 years. Enough is enough. My main goal is for my kid to love school again and not to worry about being there. I don't want him to worry about if he is going to have to be picked on or fight that day. I don't want his learning and scores to be interrupted because they want to mess with him in the classroom. I want his worries to be, did I study enough for this test? And so I ask you to please consider and take this into account in releasing my son from the Des Moines Public School District. And again, I'd like to thank you for your time and your consideration in this matter and for hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I would entertain a motion and a second to deny the late applications for open enrollment identified by case number in the agenda based on district policy and state code.
So moved.
We have a motion from Barron and a second from Langford. Is there any discussion or are there any comments?
I do have,
Yes.
just generally speaking, I guess, for this report and the next agenda item, I went ahead and followed up and had some questions for some clarification. When it says, DMPS can accommodate, and then it's kind of, we have a little reasoning and all this information in here. I guess it's presumed that there's conversations actually occurring, and I'm finding that's not the case, and there's a lot of question marks, although it today prompted some additional follow-up by the district to ensure that the information got to the family. But I guess I thought we've already had conversations about that was already going to be happening, and we didn't have to assume that it was. I mean, we were safe to assume it was happening, but all 3 cases that I looked into, that wasn't the case. So I have great concerns about these reports if I can't go based on, assume that these conversations are happening between the district and the family. If we say we can accommodate them, I'm assuming we're telling them how we can accommodate them, not just denying them and giving them forms, the form answers. So I got my answers for the questions that I had, but I don't want to have to ask each individual one. I would like to know that those families have been contacted.
Any additional questions or comments from board members? We have a motion and a second to deny the late applications for open enrollment. Let's move to the vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item number E2, open enrollment appeal for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
Yes, this next item is timely applications that were denied and then were appealed. By state code, there are certain denials that could be approved or overturned because of special circumstances. Those items on tonight's agenda are those items that are those cases that did not meet the denial bar.
We do have one speaker for item number E2, Doug Paulson. If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Doug Paulson. My address is 770 North Pleasant Hill Boulevard, Pleasant Hill, Iowa. Thank you for hearing me today. My daughters have had trouble at East High School. For the last 2 years, I've went in talking to the administrators there numerous times and have been misled. I find a lack of trust amongst the Des Moines Public Schools administrators. My youngest daughter is Harley. To show you what, she has anger issues herself that we've been going to counseling, and she's found volleyball to be her outlet. She was put on the East Side Scarlet Volleyball Club, which is run by the coach Carroll of the East High School volleyball teams. It's not affiliated with the public schools. And they had quite a bit of dissension within the team. Some of the girls, for some reason, there's a group of them that know how to push my daughter's buttons. And the volleyball program lasts about 8 weeks. After about 6 weeks, she came out of practice one day and said that she couldn't do it anymore, the things that the kids were doing, and she was ready to punch somebody. So the next day I called Coach Carroll, and my main thing to discuss with her was that I had to take my daughter off the team. She does have some issues with her temper, but she's been doing much better with him. And I don't know if you've read the appeals or the things that have came in from Mr. Reaping, but each time I've been called down this year for her, he said she's handled it real well, and she is handling her emotions real well. But I told Coach Carroll that night when I talked to her about taking her off the team, there was no need to discuss it with another parent, and the pressure was still going to be there. It was easier for me to pull her out. And so that's what I did. I just told her there's no, she knows about the dissension in the team. I pulled her off the team. And that's pretty much my approach with East High School and Des Moines Public Schools. There doesn't seem to be an answer. These girls, they offered open enrollment at other schools. Well, that's some of the problems I've had with my older daughter. They sent the boy to North High School where he was supposed to go. So he can't go to North. These girls that are causing the problems also have friends at Lincoln, so you can't go to Lincoln. I think my daughter, with her issues with her temper, needs to be at a smaller school, a more controlled school. That's why I am really close to being at the Southeast Polk School District, but that would be putting her in the same situation. What I'd like to do is put her into a smaller school that's more controlled. At Saydell High School, they have 8 class periods. Everybody's in a class. And I noticed, I don't know about the other schools, but I know at East High School, there's always an open period where there are students wandering the halls. And I don't know, when I went to school, that never happened. I think the students should have a place to be. The only time they gave me any kind of protection they could have, it was a punishment to my daughter, and I was surprised they would even hand it to me. She had to be in class on time while the other students didn't have to be, or she would be written up. She couldn't be out in the hallways like the other students on free periods because she would be written up, because some other kids were trying to attack her. And I guess that's my only point coming here is, you know, and my daughters also have had the stress of me. I have stage 4 melanoma cancer. And I get these phone calls. The first phone call I'll take. The second one, I don't go with phone calls. I go with personal. I go down and want to talk to them face to face. And so far, none of them have been prepared for it. Every time I've set up a meeting, the people are not there on time and they're not prepared. And that was Mr. Reaping twice. The first meeting, I accepted it. The principal came in and denigrated my daughter, and I stood up and said, I won't put up with that. She has a problem with this boy harassing her, and you're telling my daughter it's her fault. The second meeting with Mr. Reaping was, he was late, and I had had it. I'm sorry, cancer does give you a short temper span. I gave him about 15 minutes and I had had it. I talked to the other guy and I told him what my problem was. And of course, he listened to everything I said and never called me back. That was a typical approach of the administrators I've had so far. I'd like to thank you for your time. And so I'm hoping you guys will let my daughters go to Sadell and make our lives a little easier. Because there is a lot of stress in their lives too with me going through this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being here this evening. We do not have any other speakers on this item, so I would entertain a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment appeal identified by case number in the agenda based on Iowa Code and District Policy.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from Barron. Are there any questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. To the gentlemen who were here speaking on behalf of their students, decisions for students requesting to leave the Des Moines Public Schools are processed in accordance with the district's state-approved diversity plan. The actions of the board this evening regarding open enrollment reflect our requirements under state law and those of our diversity plan. Even though your request for open enrollment has been denied, there are multiple ways your students' education can still be fulfilled by the Des Moines Public School District. I would ask that you see Eleanor Shirley, who's over by the wall, if you have not yet had a chance to meet her. She can certainly share with you specifics with regard to next steps that you have and ways that we might be able to continue to support your student here in the Des Moines Public Schools. Thank you for being here. The next item on our agenda is item number E3, Monitoring Report on Preschool Part 2. Superintendent Ahart?
Yes, we have our, not the entire, but most of the leadership team here that serve our pre-K students. And this supports the second of one of the board priority areas, preschool education. So welcome, Susie, and team.
Thank you.
Good evening. We're here tonight to update you on the student achievement progress since we last met, and to also inform you where we're heading as a department. With me this evening, you've already know Susie Guest, Program Supervisor, and we have some of her administrative team here as well. To my right is Angie Constable. She's the administrator at Woodlawn and also oversees early childhood special education. And then Celeste Kelling, she is the administrator overseeing McKee, and Jesse Franklin Taylor.
Next slide. Should I do that?
Can I get the keyboard? I need the keyboard to go to the next slide, sorry.
Do it.
The early childhood key performance indicators are looking at whether students are ready for kindergarten in regard to literacy, math, and social emotional development, as well as if parents and families are engaged in their education of their child. So in our last report, we already talked about fall kindergarten FAST progress, so you won't see it on this one. Instead, tonight, we're going to give you an update on our progress with GOLD, since we just finished the end of the year assessment, so you'll see fall to winter to spring. We'll also highlight our behavior referrals and some of the work around parent engagement. And then at the end, we'll talk very briefly about some of our next steps. And again, you know, we're always aligning the work with the K-12 system so that we're supporting priorities as far as the instructional framework, MTSS, SRG, and our cultural proficiency work. So you'll hear that mentioned throughout the presentation.
As Susie just said, you're going to hear about GOLD, and that's Teaching Strategies GOLD, which is our assessment tool that's mandated by the state. And there are 3 checkpoints throughout the year. And so we just finished our spring, so we can compare how kids did in the fall now to the spring. GOLD is also, it also focuses on all domains of learning, but for our key performance indicators, we'll be focusing on literacy, math, and social skills. One of the things that I remember talking with you about in April, doesn't seem that long ago, was that Teaching Strategies GOLD moved to a different platform this year. And so, I don't know if you recall me telling you about that. So several objectives for learning were added, as well as criteria for leveling kids as to how they were doing. So when you think about what we did in the past to our performance this year, we can't compare the two. So this is almost like a baseline year once again, because we'd be comparing apples to oranges if we did so. So this, again, it's kind of like a baseline year. Our current goals were based on the old platform. Okay, so in your monitoring report, we have the social emotional area, and our goal was 90%, and we actually came in at 87%, and that means 87% of students were either meeting or exceeding kindergarten readiness scores. Our literacy goal was 85%, and our actual was 82%. And our math goal was 80, and our actual was 73%. Now, again, because the 2 platforms are different, I can't tell you how that looks in comparison to previous years, but we can going forward. But what I do want to show here is the progress that we've made over time from fall to winter, or fall to spring. And so there's been, in social and emotional, a 59% increase in student readiness from the fall to the spring. In the area of literacy, there was growth of 70%, and in math, there was an increase of 66%.
Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is our behavior incident reporting. Looking at our core data, and when you look at our data, it indicates that we have a strong core and that overall expectations are being taught consistently across our classrooms. When you look at the green, that shows the number of 88% of students who received 0 to 1 behavior incident reports. So that shows that our core is meeting the majority of our student needs. The yellow, which I don't really see yellow on your slide,
No.
6% of our students have received 2 to 5 behavior incident reports over the course of the school year. And in a red section, so the very tippy top, 7% of students have received 6 or more behavior incident reports. 88%, again, was our number of students receiving 0 to 1, and our projection for this year was 86%. So we did exceed that projection. We also looked at our data based on race and ethnicity. And when we looked at Black or African Americans, those students make up 19% of our population in preschool, and they made up 31% of our BIRs. So that is an area that we were disproportionate in and that we need to continue to address. Our Asian students make up 9% of our population, and we're at 0.65 of the BIRs written. Our Hispanic students were 21% of our population and 11% of the BIRs. Students of more than one race were 6% of the population and 10% of our BIRs. White students were 44% of our population and 47% of our BIRs. And males of color were 19% of the population and 23% of our BIRs. So we do have some steps and some things that we need to continue to work on in regards to disproportionality and looking at those students.
Another one of our KPI areas is in parent engagement. And every year at the end of the year, we do a parent survey, and we ask them several questions on there. But one of our parent engagement activities is called Pack Time, Parent and Child Together. And that's a weekly activity where parents come into the classroom for 15 or 20 minutes and do an activity with their child that's related to what we've done in the curriculum during the last week. And then the activity is designed that parents can take that home and do it at home with their children. So a couple of the comments that parents told us about Pack Time was that we liked finding numbers and letters around the classroom. Now we find letters around the house and the store. The night routine, which is we do an activity where parents create a bedtime routine for their children and cut out pictures and put them on to help prepare them and make sure they're getting to bed on time. And so someone mentioned they still use that at home. It's interesting that we always ask them what their favorite activity was, and we always have people choose all of the activities. There's not necessarily one that stands out, so they always kind of enjoy those. Another activity that we do in parent engagement is called Coffee and Connections. This has been one of our most successful activities that we've done. It's once a month in each of the 4 early childhood centers, and we do have a calendar set out for the year, a schedule of events. We not only use our own nurse who might talk about too much sugar or teeth brushing and give out toothbrushes to everyone. Our social worker talks a lot about social emotional health and talks informally with parents, answers their questions about how they might help children at home. And maybe our family engagement facilitators will talk about upcoming programs. We also invite outside resources like DART or Evelyn Davis, Legal Aid, different groups, outside groups each month to come in and provide resources to parents. These have been very successful, and we're going to continue this again into next year. Hope I'm on the right slide. And then again, we had a couple more comments from our surveys of people coming into our schools. You know, every parent has to park and bring their child into the school, sign them in, and do the same thing at the end of the day. So we always like it when they say things like, "I felt so welcome. Thanks for a great experience for my child and myself. My child has grown by leaps and bounds this year, socially, emotionally, academically, and our teachers were amazing." Needless to say, we love to hear that. "My daughter's interest in sounds and letters has exploded, and she loves it. Thank you." We have many other parent engagement activities, from policy committee to volunteering, family events. And at the beginning of the year, every teacher does a home visit. And that, so we can give parents the opportunity to tell us about their child and what's important to them. And I think that starts building that relationship right away. So hopefully you've seen for our brief report today that really our core program is very strong. The data shows that we are making good progress in literacy, math, social emotional, and with behavior as well. Over 80% of our students were meeting all of our targets except for math, which continues to be a low spot every year, but we're going to keep providing PD and working on that as we continue. Next steps. Please call security 7621. 7621. Next steps for us, as we look at our data, in the past years, we've looked at our data as a department, an early childhood department. And next year, we're going to start looking at it more by the 4 centers and the couple programs we have in elementary schools, as well as by individual classrooms and teachers to see where we really need to fine-tune our coaching and strengthen our PD for individual teachers. We also want to continue looking at our subgroup disaggregated data and continue a focus on African American students, African American males, like the district does. Then also for next steps, we've been already this year busy planning our professional development for next year. We're going to work on some math, continue working on the math PD, looking at the FAST Bridge and the Project Task to see how we can infuse some of those strategies into early childhood and help prepare children for kindergarten.
We'll continue our work with Marzano's instructional framework. We are very excited that all the early childhood centers have met all the requirements for the Tier 1 activities, and now we're moving on to Tier 2 for behavior strategies and interventions. So we're looking forward to that. Certainly, we're going to continue our focus on equity and continue to strengthen our PLCs for our staff so we can continue to grow and learn. And I think now we're open for questions and any discussion you might have.
Any questions from board members on the Part 2 monitoring report for preschool? Yes.
Quickly, I just want to say I've had the opportunity to attend the Coffee and Connections at Taylor, and it was so exciting to see how engaged the parents were. It's a really cool thing to see. I stay continually impressed with the preschools and how you're reaching out to the members of our community and families. I just had a quick question around some of your equity work. I was really excited to see that we're hiring 3 new equity coaches or coordinators, but I didn't know, is that separate from our preschool programs?
Yeah, we won't have one of those specifically addressed to or assigned to the preschool program.
Sure. So what does that look like for you all in terms of addressing some of those concerns?
We just spent 2 full days in equity work with the district. So again, we may not have the equity coach assigned to us. However, we attend all the trainings. And what we discussed as part of our plan for this coming year, because we've really, over the last 2 years, we've really took a hard look at cultural proficiency and providing PD for our staff. So we're going to take it just another step further. And when we are doing our work on the instructional framework, equity is about the language you use and how you keep equity in the forefront when you're making decisions with children. And so we're going to be showing that will be a part of all of our professional development. So for example, if we're doing, we do lots of videos showing teachers in action. There's a difference between teaching through the lens of equity and how you ask questions and those types of things. And so we'll be videoing teachers and providing those examples to our staff. So we're going to, last year when we did this, last couple of years, we really focused on literacy. This year it's going to be equity and math. So the examples will really highlight those 2 areas.
Okay.
And I would just add a couple things. Susie and her team also attend our leadership PLCs that occur on a monthly basis. And that's when schools and their leadership teams or departments and their lead teams are able to get together. And we do have additional discussions, conversations, new learning around equity. And so they've been a part of that throughout the entire year. And then I think you also heard Celeste mention about looking at the data a little bit differently as a program when looking at it overall as a whole. You know, that tells us one picture, but as we break it down by individual sites and even more specifically by individual classrooms, I think that's going to allow even a better focus and more targeted, conversations and follow-up when addressing that.
For sure. Thank you.
Any additional questions from board members?
There were a couple numbers that I think you were talking about that you said didn't match up to our slides. And I'm assuming that what you were referring to when you were talking about red, yellow, and green was you were talking about a tiered approach. Is that true? You're using like an MTSS?
Yes.
Okay. And so it sounds like from your numbers that the top, like the level 3 is a little bit high. Am I remembering that correctly?
Our top was, I'm on the wrong
You said
slide.
7?
7.
Okay. And the typical breakdown is usually, is it 1 to 5, is what we would want to seek. Is that correct? Is like a 1 to 5% on a level 3 intervention? Yes. Okay. And so the steps then that you were talking about in terms of that's what you're going to be doing to address that.
15.5.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that I was processing that correctly. So so the next steps that you'll be working on by working with the different subgroups and doing particularly around the you didn't call it behavior. BIRs. Yes. Remind me what the BIRs are, can you please?
Behavior incident reports. So those are what teachers submit into Infinite Campus for students who are exhibiting behavior.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Any additional questions from board members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is item number E4, monitoring report on early, I'm sorry, we need to take action on that. I apologize. Trying to keep us moving tonight. I would entertain a motion and a second to accept the monitoring report on preschool.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Barron and a second from De La Gardelle Shelley. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion carries 7-0. We will now move to our early literacy monitoring report, part 2. You going to do an introduction?
Sure. This is the second elementary reading report, and with us is our Executive Director of Elementary Education, again, Susie Tallman, and our Elementary Literacy Coordinator, Liz Grizzle, and our Director from the AEA serving DMPS, Carlene Lodemeyer.
Okay, well, good evening again. Now we're here to present part 2 of our early literacy progress. We're going to spend just a minute on this slide. When looking at our key performance indicators, this just kind of gives you an overview of each one and also by grade level. Just a reminder, when we report out FAST progress to you, we do look at our pattern, our trends over a 3-year period of time. However, when looking at MAP, it's 2 years, so just to make you aware of that. So when looking at the chart, and looking at our first key performance indicator in regard to FAST, you can see overall in kindergarten and first grade there was a decrease, and in second and third grade there was an increase. Now, if you were to look at that in comparison from last year to this year, you would see an increase overall in all grade levels with the exception of first grade. So it's what we're seeing in the data is really pinpointing specifically to a particular grade level. The color yellow just means in second and third grade, the growth that was made was anywhere from 1% to 5%. When you take a look at the next key performance indicator and looking at the percent meeting growth targets, that is, growth target is the amount that's needed to grow in order to stay at the same percentile from fall to spring. And so when you take a look at second and third grade, you see that there was an increase at both grade levels. However, they're color-coded yellow because they haven't yet met the 50th percentile, and that's what we are shooting for in regard to meeting like the national norm, and of course 60% if we're wanting to begin reducing gaps. They were about 3 to 4% away from meeting that goal. When looking at the next key performance indicator in regard to projected growth met, this one's a little bit different. We're looking at our students. We expect them to meet at least 100% of their projected growth. So again, when looking at second and third grade, you see that there's been an increase. However, it's color-coded yellow because they didn't meet the 100% mark yet. And then the last key performance indicator is the percent, or is college and career readiness, looking at students that are on track as far as meeting benchmarks. You see there was an increase at second grade in all subgroups except for one, and then there was a decrease at third grade. And then I'll turn it over to Carlene, and she's going to talk more specifically about FAST.
You're going to work that. Good evening. I'm going to quickly go through some of the results around the FAST screening data. And as we move into this, just a reminder that the benchmark changes across the year, so it increases. So in order for students to continue to meet the benchmark, they have to continue to grow. So that'll kind of jump out in a little bit further. So When we're looking at the kindergarten data, this is a real area of celebration, particularly from the fall to spring. We had 13.5% of the increase of the number of students meeting the benchmark. And you can see the greatest gains were with our free and reduced, ELL, and Hispanic student groups. We had some pretty dramatic increases there. When we looked across from spring 2016 to spring 2018, we had a slight decrease. And all groups also made a slight decrease. And again, as Susie said, that we had kind of a high bump that 3 years ago, and we're just trying to kind of compensate for that big bump in that. So on this next slide, when you look at the percent of students that met the benchmark in the fall, still meeting the percent of benchmarks in the spring, we had 88% of our kindergartners. So again, that's a real sign that our students are responding to the instruction, because if they met the benchmark, they continued to meet the benchmark and had to grow in order to do that. The first grade data is not the way we want it to be. That continues to be an area of concern for us. We had a slight decrease of 1% from fall to spring. So we had a few students that didn't meet enough growth to continue to meet the benchmark. This is kind of interesting because this is also very representative of what we're experiencing across all the AEAs and as well as the state. So we're kind of trying to figure out what's going on with the first grade data across the state. So we're not atypical of what's actually occurring with other districts as well. We did have a nice gain with ELL, and then you can see our special education was a very high concern. And one of the things to keep in mind is that a high percentage of referrals actually occur in that first grade level, so the data is not the same students in the fall as they are in the spring. There's a lot more students that probably have been now are on IEPs at first grade level, so that's kind of contributing to that. We did see from spring to spring, 2016 to 2018, an increase with our ELL and Asian population at first grade. And we did have 83% of our students that were meeting the benchmark in the fall, still meeting the benchmark, and particularly at first grade in the fall, it's really pretty isolated on foundational skills and really moves to real reading by the end of the first grade. So that's really exciting that we're keeping that many students really robustly growing across first grade. A real area, which I think we really feel is exciting, is the fact that when these students learn these foundational skills, of course, the real purpose is to do real reading. And you can see at our second and third grade data, we're really experiencing some good positive growth. And this is really just based on pure reading for our students. It's measuring their fluency and accuracy. So from fall to spring, we had a 3% gain. All groups increased except for special ed. We had a 4% increase with free and reduced, almost 4% with white, and almost 3.3% with ELL. In the spring data, we also experienced even a bigger growth across the 3-year trend, with 5% of our students now meeting the benchmark additional. Our Asian and our African American groups and free and reduced grew significantly, but we had a slight decrease again with our special education students at that second grade level. We had an even stronger percentage of our students that met the benchmark entering second grade, continuing to meet that benchmark by the spring of 2018. So that's another really good thing that we feel like our core instruction is really working well for students. At the third grade level.
Can I ask just a real quick question?
Sure.
So I want to make sure I'm clear. So on the far left, it's fall to spring for the current year.
Right.
And on the right, it's over a 2-year period, 3-year period.
Well, no, did we 2016 to
16 to 18.
Okay.
17, 18.
18, so it'd be 3-year.
Okay.
Spring of 16, 17, and now 18.
So, and again, this is maybe me not understanding the reporting of the data, but for those groups to have such a significant increase from spring of 16 to 18, it's not reflected in the fall to spring. So help me understand why that discrepancy. It's maybe just me not understanding how you're sharing the data.
So these are all second graders in the fall to spring. They're the same students that are in second grade in the fall, and then how many are now meeting the benchmark, even though the benchmark is changing. So the ones on the right, those are different groups of students, and I think we can hypothesize that the reason we have such good increases is because they have experienced better instruction at kindergarten, better instruction in first grade, and now they're second graders, and they're coming in higher and ready to really embrace that whole concept of really reading. So that's our hypothesis, because we've really worked hard to strengthen that kindergarten and first grade instruction over time, the last few years. And we're seeing the benefit of that. And then, like I said, the goal is to really be able to take all those skills and put them together and actually read. So that's exciting to us.
That makes sense.
Sort of, we'll talk about it later.
Okay. Yeah, on the left, that's last year's students.
Right.
And on the right, that's last year's, the year before, and the year before.
Yep.
Compared again. So the growth from the third graders, or the second graders in this case, from 2 years ago, their overall achievement level versus the overall achievement
time.
of this year's second graders.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it speaks to strength of the system.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Okay, so if looking at third grade data, the trends that we saw again is some increases from fall to spring with the same students, particularly with our multiracial, our ELL, and free and reduced. We saw some decreases in Asian and special education students. And then across the 3 years, we did see a little over 2% of our students increasing the amount that are meeting benchmark. We saw a significant increase with our multiracial students, with our African-American students and Asian students. We saw, just minimal growth or less and with our special ed. And then our greatest concern is with those third graders that are ELL students. And you can see we kept 88% of the students that met the benchmark in the fall at third grade are still meeting the benchmark in the spring. So they had to grow in order to continue to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and she's going to talk a little bit about our tiered system.
And I think you guys probably have a little bit more information about our tiered system in terms of what each tier receives of support in our monitoring report. So I'm just going to speak to the outcome data here. You have data for 5 schools here that received intensive support, so Tier 3 support from the district early literacy team. The report that you have details, although you can see it on the screen as well, their fall to spring gains and losses. I want to point out here, a celebration for us is that 3 of these 5 schools that received intensive support exceeded the district fall to spring average increase. So as a district, we grew 4%. 4.08%, and 3 of our schools that received that support grew more than that, and they have more to grow, so that would make sense. This next slide shows those schools that received targeted support, so our Tier 2 support. There are 10 schools that received targeted support. Of those 10, 7 exceeded the district average growth of 4.08%. And again, you've got a range there from fall to winter in terms of the growth of those 10 schools, but 7 exceeded the district average. And lastly, just kind of to break down the schools for you, you've got 17 of our schools made more than 5% growth. 9 of those schools were either receiving targeted or intensive support from that district level. So we have 17 schools that made great growth fall to spring. And then 9 schools made anywhere between 0.01% and 5% growth. And then 8 schools made either anywhere between -5 and 0% growth. And we have 5 schools that had losses of 5% or more. And this data helps us identify which schools then will be receiving intensive support next year as well. So it's interesting to see just the big gains of 17 of our schools and then where we can support further in terms of district early literacy support.
Okay, and then a deeper look at MAP. On this slide, we're looking at the percent of students that met their growth target, specifically second and third grade. So we're looking at the amount needed to grow in order to stay at the same percentile from fall to spring. And again, 50% is the national norm, 60% is where we are starting to close gaps. So if you take a look at the chart, in regard to, let's say, special education, if we're looking at the data from spring 2017 to spring 2018, they made a 4.24% growth. And then again, for African American, you see there was an increase, and also for our Hispanic subgroup as well. Then when taking a look at areas of concern, our multiracial had a decrease from 17 to 18 of 3.10%. Also, our white subgroup had a decrease of 1.10. We didn't get that up there, but they also had a decrease, as well as a slight decrease for ELL. All other subgroups made gains. Celebrations at third grade, our largest growth made was our multiracial and Hispanic subgroups. You can see there. And then our areas of concern, our African American and Asian, those are the only two subgroups at that grade level that did have a decrease. On the next slide, we're looking at projected growth, so this is a little bit different. 100% is the goal for the percent of fall to spring projected growth met, is what we're looking at. Now, on this slide, we didn't put up there, but we did have one subgroup that did exceed the 100%, and that is white. However, when you take a look at second grade, we have a couple other celebrations. If you take a look at special education, they grew 15.60%, and African American grew 10.94%. Now, the strange thing about that is you also see it down as special education as an area of concern as well. And the reason being for that is that they were one of our subgroups that performed the lowest. However, it's also identified as a celebration because they made significant growth from last year to this year. And then same with ELL, they were identified because they were our other subgroup that had a lower percentage of projected growth met. However, they also are up from last year about 3.48%. When looking at third grade, you're kind of seeing the same thing. We have special education as a celebration based on the progress made from last spring to this spring, as well as our Hispanic subpopulation. But then special education identified as an area of concern because they were at at the lowest percentage of all subgroups. However, they're up 12.16% from last year, which also made that a celebration. And then our African American subpopulation also was identified as one of the subgroups that had a lower percentage of 79.44%. And that was a slight decrease from last year. And then on the last slide, we're looking at college and career readiness as far as our second and third graders that are meeting benchmark from spring 2017 to spring 2018. In second grade, overall, we had over a 3% gain, with the greatest gains in our Asian and Hispanic subgroups. And then our area, and really all of our subgroups made gains in second grade as well. And we just had a slight decrease in special education, which we identified as an area of concern with a negative 0.67%. In third grade, however, a little bit different. Overall, we had a little bit over a 2% decrease. And Most subgroups did have a decrease as well, with the exception you see multiracial made a 3%, over a 3% gain from spring 2017 to 2018. And our two subgroups that had the greatest decrease were African American and Asian. However, what's kind of interesting about that is they are also our two subgroups on FAST that made the greatest gains.
Board questions? Yes.
Couple quick ones. You brought up special education a few times, and I noticed it as well in reading the stuff ahead of time. Knowing that that's not a population that we strictly monitor at the board level, is there something on the macro level that we should know about our special education students or strategies that are being pursued to better catch them up?
Sure. From the data that Liz shared, she had mentioned with our intensive support schools as well as our targeted schools that they have received, support from the early literacy team and have worked a lot on early literacy foundational skills. And a lot of buildings have been receiving training most recently in regard to Orton Gillingham that really focuses in on those foundational skills. And so one of the things that special education has done over the past year, knowing that that's an area of concern, has been getting teachers trained. And so that took place this past year. And so looking into going into next year, I think is, how do we continue to support that and monitor implementation so we can see where are areas that maybe support is still needed so that we make sure that we're being a little bit more targeted in our support. But that was a step to help to begin addressing special education.
Thank you. And on the schools that receive the deeper level of support, I think Liz pointed out that 9 of those schools grew at above 5%. 9 of the 17 schools that you identified that grew at that level. So it was 9 out of the 11 schools that received the 2 deeper levels of support. Does that point to, or should we learn that that's an appropriate intervention, that, funding being what it is not right now, but is that something that we should be doing on a broader level at this level of support if we're growing, and if those schools are providing more than half of the elementary schools that are growing at that fast of a clip, is this something that we should be doing more of?
Well, we only supported those schools, you're exactly right, because of the limitations of resources that we have on our district early literacy team. And we're very grateful to Heartland Support because they lent over half of the folks on that team, our AEA members. And then we calibrate on support and then kind of disperse that support out to those buildings. And as you mentioned, we just don't have the resources to support more. So funding's always welcome, obviously. But yeah, that just seeing those significant gains, if we could support every school in that intense level, we could probably see those gains in more buildings as well.
I would also say though that and I echo your comments, Liz, about the Heartland support and this whole intensive support process. Really, I want to recognize Wilma Geidel because she helped us get creative about how we applied for the last round of school improvement grants that were available under No Child Left Behind through the state, and that was really what launched this, with the whole idea of exactly your point. Let's figure out what works and then scale that as possible. One thing though that is a little bit not misleading, but that people often forget is those schools that have the most room to grow can grow the fastest with intensive support. So providing that same level and type of support across the district would likely not equate to that same rate of growth across the board, because we have some schools that really don't need that and are already growing well, and we wouldn't expect as much growth for a school that's already performing at a higher level. So,
And
but
one of the
your
things,
basic point, yeah, absolutely is right.
And one of the things in regard to the work that the early literacy team has done, by identifying the most discrepant schools, we have some now, due to the report that they received, are exiting out. And so the good thing about that is they now have a lot of the skills and strategies that they need to continue to support it in the building. And then we are able to bring some additional schools that now need more support on board. The other thing is, I think we've done a really good job at looking at our data and getting really specific and targeted. And if you take a look and break that down by each network, all schools are making growth, and it's really coming down to a couple schools that we see in each network that we know we need to dig into a little bit more. So the good part about that is other buildings are making progress. We're able to get support to more and then be even more targeted with what the data is telling us. Whereas before it was maybe a variety of different schools.
Appreciate it. And one final question, and this goes beyond the early literacy report into the males of color report. I noticed that some of the one set of the KPIs flipped from last year to this year. In both, we were measuring percent of students at or above NEA MAP, college and career readiness a year ago, and then this year now we're looking at projected growth targets on NWEA MAP, and it's different numbers. I'm just curious if there's some context on.
Well, because this is the second year that we have data, so the half of that we couldn't really look at last year. Yeah.
So it's just a matter of
Right.
So this will be the data that we'll see going forward. It'll be meeting growth targets. Thank you.
Other board questions?
This might actually be more related to the board and how we run monitoring and KPIs in the future. But one thing that I wasn't seeing in here that I was interested in, and I wasn't sure if maybe you could illuminate for us, is I'm assuming we probably have some sort of cohort data, how some of our kids who are in third grade now, how their growth has been since kindergarten. I know you're not prepared to give me in-depth answers, but can you kind of give me a sense of what that's looked like for those students? Because we can see where they're at third grade, but I guess what I'm thinking about too is the number of kids that are kind of dropping out, or not dropping out of school, but they're dropping out of that proficient, or they're dropping out of that growing, and kind of what's happening with those kids, I guess, is kind of what I'm curious about.
Our typical trend line is that more kiddos are meeting at kindergarten, and then that number decreases. So without looking at the cohort data specifically, my inclination is that most of them are maintaining, but there are a few that are dropping out. Yeah, so we could probably pull that data to get that to you guys so that we can analyze that and you can have a look at that too.
Okay, and that just might be something to think about for monitoring as we're thinking about kids as they go through, because we do know that trends show us that those kids do drop out, and that just might be something for us to think about. So
The 3-year trend line that they showed on the right-hand side of some of those slides doesn't get exactly at what you're asking, but generally gets at that. So you can see,
yeah.
Other board questions? So I too was interested in the same area that Rob chatted about relative to the number of schools that were having gains or losses on the benchmark data for FAST. And tell me a little bit more about what the intensive support looks like.
That's me again. In our intensive support this past year, we had all of the kindergarten and first grade teachers received, which Susie spoke of, Orton Gillingham methodology training. It was a 3-day training, which is an explicit phonics program with a multisensory component intended really developed for students with dyslexia, but just an intensive foundational skills program with lots of explicit instruction and lots of time for students to respond and put their skills into practice. So all of those K-1 teachers received that along along with some of the support teachers, and by K1 teachers, I mean classroom teachers, along with the support teachers, such as interventionists and ELL. And then members of our team, our early literacy team on the district level, then supported implementation. So we went out, did walkthroughs, collected observation data on components and how well those components were implemented with fidelity in the classroom, and then met with groups of grade level PLCs, the kindergarten and first grade teachers, to discuss barriers, how we could remove those barriers and strengthen implementation, and then really helped them look at their data, look at their progress monitoring data for those students and make sure that they were growing, and when they weren't, talking specifically about what was happening for those students who we weren't seeing growth with, and how we could adjust instruction for them. So we were there, the intention was 1 to 3 hours every week. An early lit support person would be there doing walkthroughs and meeting with PLCs, but in the end it ended up being a few more hours, because when you get into the building and they see you there to help and address, then we are always responsive to doing so. And then also a 3-hour on-site support session with their leadership team and a group of teachers on their early literacy team to talk about big pictures and systematic change in the building that would lead to higher achievement results. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what that intensive support looked like.
So it's, I guess, a focus on professional development and training. And so I guess the model of sustainability then is to sort of embed those practices so that when you exit, that will continue. That was sort of my biggest concern is, so what happens when you're no longer there? So you're confident that the kind and type of training has been absorbed in a way that hopefully it can be sustained when you're no longer physically present on a somewhat regular basis?
Yeah, because it's expected for the building administrator and their lead team. I mean, really, they're the ones that are helping lead this work with the support of the early literacy person. So they're coming in and they're providing, modeling and coaching and feedback. But really, it's intended to build the capacity of the principal and the team. And, they're not relinquished of the responsibilities. They're right in there with the early literacy team member all through the process, so that then when they leave, that they can sustain the work themselves. They've given them a process and some tools to be able to continue to carry the work forward.
We were intentional about the end of the year, making sure that we had built capacity and we could start backing out, but we also, in our upcoming year, have a layer of support for those exiting, so that we're not just backing out completely, but we're there to make sure that things are ongoing, and then being able to completely back out of that support and keep that implementation strong.
Any other board questions? Yes, Ms. Langford.
To the point about the increased support to some of our schools, what grade level was it? We had 5 schools, 3 saw grade improvement, 2 did not. What grade level we're looking at then? Could somebody remind me? Was that?
That's K3
K3.
collapse data. Mm-hmm.
For those 2 buildings that didn't necessarily see the growth that we were hoping to, were there any lessons learned, or were there any themes that emerged from those 2 buildings?
Implementation fidelity was kind of in a nutshell, our lesson learned. So we could track mostly anecdotally, but since we all used observation sheets to know which teachers had implemented, did see stronger gains than those that had implemented with less fidelity. And so, lesson learned. We have a tighter protocol next year for those intensive support people, so that whether it's me or someone else on my team going out to support, it looks very similar based on the data that we know caused gains. So yeah.
When one building in particular, they made great growth at kindergarten, but then at first and second grade, had decreases. And so implemented with fidelity at one grade level, but not the others.
Yeah, and I just asked that question because I know at the end of the day, data is reflective of people, right? So it's just, what do we learn? Cool, thank you.
Any additional board questions? I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the early literacy monitoring report.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Barron and a second from Ellsburn. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Report approved, 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is monitoring report on Algebra 1, Part 2, agenda item E5. Superintendent?
Yes, tonight we have our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Noelle Tickey, and our outgoing secondary math coordinator, who will be leaving us for Hoover High School as a school improvement leader, and our Director of High Schools, Mike Vukovic.
Christy was sharing how sad she is that this is her last report.
Yeah, clearly. She looks
Yeah, she looks like
heartbroken.
super bummed. Totally bummed.
Hopefully I'll get to come up and speak with you about the great things we're doing at Hoover High School in the
Right,
future.
there.
So I'd like to go ahead and get us started off with this evening, and I know a lot of these are things we've already discussed in the other board monitoring reports, but as you know, in my last visit, I like to bring the visuals as much as possible. So just a reminder that when we're looking at the percent of students who have met or exceeded their growth goal, we're looking at number of students, and that national norm is 50%, but we know we really start closing gaps when we're 60% or higher. Versus looking at percent of projected growth met, we expect all students, that's how much growth they're making as a whole group. And we really expect students to meet 100% of their growth goal. And we know accelerated growth occurs when we're above that 120%. So that's just some good benchmarks as you're looking at the data to go, how much progress are we making and how are we moving forward? So as we look at our key performance indicators, our percent of students meeting projected growth targets, 8th grade does not currently have all students groups increasing. We do have all groups though above 50%, so that's why the yellow arrow. So I would have put green had we been above 60% and all groups increasing, but we're not quite there yet. In 9th grade, we had all groups increase and all groups above 50%. We saw great gains in 9th grade this last year. When we look at percent of projected growth met, 8th grade had all groups above 100% and all groups had increased. When I looked at 9th grade, we had an increase in all groups and all but 2 groups are above 100%. So we're making great growth, we have more to go. And we'll look at that specifically as we look at those celebrations and areas of concern. We look at percent of students at above college and career readiness. We know that bar is higher and we continue to work on growth as we continue to help our students get closer to that high bar. This year, we did have a slight decrease in 8th grade. We did have an increase in 9th grade. However, we're still less than 25% of our students meeting that college and career readiness benchmark. When we look at students completing Algebra 1 with a C or higher, we look at both 8th grade, by the end of 8th grade, and by the end of 9th grade. We saw a small decrease in percent of students earning a C or higher in 8th grade, but however, we're still at 90% of those students that are completing it by the end of 8th grade, earning a C or higher. We've also seen an increase in participation. So we look at the last 3 years, when we started looking at the data, it was at 18% of our students were taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Last year, we were up to 20, and this last year, we got up to 22%. So we've increased each year in participation. When we look at percent of students completing Algebra 1 with a C or higher by the end of 9th grade, we saw a slight increase, and not all groups have an increase yet. We'll get there. Percent of students failing Algebra 1 has decreased. However, we are not below 10% of students failing the course. So therefore, I'm not going to put us at a green arrow yet. We're not there yet. So now as we look at each of those and look at our groups and where are our celebrations, a reminder, when we're looking at percent of students meeting their projected growth target, in 8th grade, we had all groups above 50%. When we look at those celebrations and the amount of increase, especially as I look at our students with IEPs and special needs and our English language learners, that was above 60% in those groups. So we're really starting to make some momentum there with them. Even as I look at our areas of concern, both of those groups had increases and they're above 50%. So yes, I'm concerned, but I want them all above 60, but we've got great data in that place, in that area right now. 9th grade, look at all groups are above 50%. Again, we're above that national norm. We need to get above 60% to start closing those gaps. As you look, every group had an increase, and every group was above 50%. As I look at percent of projected growth met, again, a reminder, we expect all students to meet 100%. We know accelerated growth is at above 120%. So when I look at 8th grade, all groups were greater than 100%. When I look at those two celebration groups, our English language learners were at 150% of projected growth met. So well above that 120 benchmark that we're looking at for accelerated. When I look at my areas of concern, we did have a decrease with our white students. They're still at above 100% at this point. When I look at 9th grade, all but 2 groups were above 100%. And you see very large growth as we look at 9th grade. Remember, just this time last year, we were looking at 9th grade and talking about the implementation of the MAP assessment and the struggles we were having in high school. And so it's nice to be able to sit here and look at some of this growth and really look at maybe this is more of our benchmark year and move forward. But again, great celebrations around our English language learners and the work that we have been doing to support our students. College and career ready. So from the beginning, 8th grade, we did have a decrease in all groups. When we compare the 2 years, when I look at this year's 8th graders from fall to spring, they had an increase from fall to spring. But when you're looking at data across grade levels or years, you see an overall decrease. When we look at 9th grade, all groups have increased, but again, it's not enough. We're still overall less than that 25%. Look at 8th grade, Algebra 1, ending the year with a C or higher. We saw an increase in our white students, and they're at 95%. There are concerns still around our African American students and Hispanic students. They are still above 80% of them meeting with a C or higher, but we did see a decrease, which concerns me. We look at 9th grade, we saw an increase. Again, our English language learners, a common trend we're seeing as they show up in our celebrations. They're at, there's a down arrow because they're only at 29%. We saw an increase, but we need more of our English language learners getting to Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade and doing well. Also this summer, we are continuing again with the summer math program for our middle school students. We have another 115 students engaged in summer math. Some of them have already finished everyone's finished the first 2 weeks. So the 2-week program is done. That was done last week. The 4-week program, they've got this week off, and they've got another 2 weeks of intense math work this summer. And I've spoken with all the teachers. The kids are excited. I've heard from a few parents about how grateful they are and how much the students are enjoying their time in math camp over the summer. The fact that a student wants to go in and spend their time in the summer working on math, that's got to say something. We look at percent of students failing Algebra 1. If we look at that, we have, remember, we want to see a decrease here because we want less students failing Algebra 1. I know it took me a minute going, oh, I want the yellow arrows on the minuses, yes. So if we look at that, again, our students with special needs and IEPs and our English language learners are our celebrations because they've decreased the most in the number of failures in Algebra 1. Last time I spoke with you, we talked about the impact of attendance. And again, we saw similar impact as we look at the whole year. So remember, when we look at attendance and we talk about students who are chronically absent, it's defined by students who are absent or miss more than 10% of school. And so when we looked at Algebra 1 in particular, students who miss less than 10%, about 67% of them earned a C or higher. If they missed more than 10%, only 28% earned a C or higher. So just something to think about as we look at his attendance, as we try and problem solve and figure out what is the issues our students are facing in order to be successful in Algebra 1.
All right. So really, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our approach at the high school level to this work around MAP, and also increasing the percentage of students that are receiving C's or higher and reducing the number of failures. And what I noticed in my first year on this job was walking outside of my current reality into other buildings. We have large organizations with many people, and it's very easy to move to a compliance-based system of getting through the day and checking the boxes, and the communication lacks, and it usually feeds down to the students being confused about why they have to take a certain test or what SRG really means, just any type of communication piece. And so when we looked at our data from the year before and we really investigated to our students, why didn't they feel MAP was something important? The teachers felt it was a nuisance, having to give this test 3 times during the course of the year, and they couldn't speak to what the data meant. And so we really had to talk about the culture of the building, the culture of our system at high schools, and getting to the why. The other piece that I saw was teaching is an extremely difficult job, and our teachers' efficacy and the belief that they can make a difference in their students is by far the most important thing that we need to ensure that they have. And upon visiting classrooms and talking to teachers, I don't know if they noticed that. I think that in some cases they had begun to lose that. And so while setting high expectations and telling people they have to give tests usually doesn't correlate and give us data that we're usually proud of at the end. So my challenge to the administrations of each building was to ensure that the teachers and students understood the why behind why we give the MAP, what the MAP means, why it's important, and to build that teacher efficacy. And really that happens through communication. It happens through high expectations and not wavering on that, because usually when our efficacy, either administrative efficacy or teacher efficacy, that starts to wane, usually our expectations start to lower. And so we really focused on building administrative teams that were moving away from emails to show a plan of testing, to a communication of taking time and goal setting with students, to teaching the students what MAP actually means and measures, to understand what SRG is. And none of those things are completed by any means. That takes some time to get the soil right. As you can see in the diagram, we used Anthony Muhammad's work in the high school network to really hone in on ensuring that we grow the number of believers that we have in our organization and move our fundamentalists through knowledge and honesty of here's where we've become, and not to get too deep into it, but a lot of teachers that I specifically spoke with, but also that my administrators could talk to, is when we put a language on culture, because we talk a lot about culture, but then if you asked 15 different people, they'd give you a different definition of it. Mm-hmm. And so part of our work was really using that to define it. And when we could do that, we could speak the same language. And there's definitely turmoil and ups and downs when people start to talk about things, the elephants in the room. But I think that's the only way that we're going to move forward, is with courageous leadership, courageous teaching, and the willingness to allow our kids to drive our work. And so that's what we've kind of been doing. When I think about what we did in MAP, I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud of the first steps towards our grades. But we do have data that I'm excited about that informs us of where our gaps are. And so while we really worked on special education and we reduced the number of failures, my hypothesis would be a lot stayed in the D range. And if we really want to move them, then we need to get them up to B's and A's. And we have systemic things that we need to do, and we have instructional, pedagogical, and cultural things that we need to do. But we have identified those things, and we're ready to tackle them.
So as Mike said, obviously, just focusing on the teaching of math doesn't improve scores. There's a lot that goes into the culture and the embracing of the results and high expectations that he's actually speaking at a very high level, but it's been a tremendous amount of work. So in regard to the work that's happening K-5 to prepare kids, because we know algebra readiness certainly doesn't start in 8th or 9th grade. We have done a lot of work in elementary, and that has boiled down to identifying those essential learnings. Those are those algebra readiness skills, prioritizing those so that our teachers have stripped away some of the excess so that they could really focus on mastery. We're adding a FastBridge assessment, which is a screening assessment. It's the math version of FAST for reading. And we'll be replacing some additional assessments so it's not just more testing, it's actually replacing and giving us more information. Our teachers have been our coordinators have been developing Canvas courses for teacher development, and then really focusing on a project called Project Task. I think you heard that come up in preschool as well, and that we're really excited about that. It's focusing on the development of teachers, not just the purchasing of programs. And so it is helping teachers design those rigorous tasks for students. It's a partnership with Drake. We have about 190 teachers involved over the past 2 years, and over 20 of those are now serving in this coming year as demonstration classrooms through the TLC leadership work. So we're finally to a point where we're getting some models in place that we can immerse other teachers in elementary in service of our algebra goals.
And just like we had a partnership in elementary, we had a partnership in middle school, supporting teachers around their pedagogy and their own algebra content knowledge. Actually, currently this week, those teachers are still engaged in professional development. I came from professional development with them today. They went all day yesterday, and they go through Thursday this week. As we look at that initial data, actually, from MAP, we started doing some digging into those classrooms. We're seeing initial positive results from that work. We're seeing an average growth rate as we look at the year before when they did not have that professional development to this year as an increase, specifically in the areas around African American students and English language learners, which was our target as we worked with the teachers. It is amazing to be around our educators as they are now in this week of June, after they've kind of had a little bit break from the school year, refreshed and already planning for rich tasks and how to engage students in mathematics for the fall. They don't stop, and they're going to keep going. This year, we also put in place a High School Algebra 1 tiered support plan as we continue to identify supports that our various high schools need. We have to realize that not all our high schools need the same level of support. And so we must really look at our data, look at classrooms, observations, and determine what supports each school needs. And just a reminder, we're seeing very positive results also from this tiered support plan. In that Tier 3, we really used our partnership with Heartland. Again, if we have that Heartland support to be able to provide that additional support to our schools would be greatly missed. Our Heartland math consultant was in that Tier 3 school on a weekly basis in their Algebra 1 PLC, in the Algebra 1 classrooms, providing support to the teachers and working with students. I then worked with the math administrator at that school monthly. We went into the PLC together to see what growth we were making, looking at data together and having conversations to monitor our support throughout the year. Tier 2 got that additional support from me as I worked with those administrators to help coach them, coaching teachers. We walked classrooms together. What did we see? We looked at data. What questions do we ask in PLCs? How do we help move everyone forward? And then Project Crave, which I'm sure now you're getting used to hearing Crave, I hope, a little bit more. I think I about have it all memorized. Connections, relevance, action, viewpoints, and equity. We are taking a small delay for Algebra 1. We're hoping to get them in at semester. It's very important to pick the right PLC to do the work. And as schools wrestle with the appropriate teachers teaching the appropriate courses at high school, we've had some significant changes in teachers teaching Algebra 1. And so we want to make sure we've got teachers in the classrooms that need to be working with our students in Algebra 1, giving them time to use the curriculum, getting things going, and then we'll bring them into the Project Crave once we can give them a semester to kind of get things settled. It's open for questions and discussion.
Board questions? Ms. Anderson?
Earlier, you said you had the summer school, 115 students. What's the attendance like? Just wondered, like, is it like, it's probably not like mandatory, so I'm just.
It's not mandatory. We're trying to be really flexible with students and their summers too. Through the last year or two, I've been working with other summer programs that we have in our middle school. We meet in about January to discuss dates. And the reason why we're having this week break is so that students can attend other programs and not have to conflict and choose. We wanted them to be able to do all the summer programs that Des Moines offers. So this week, there's our Talented and Gifted has a program that I think runs in the afternoon. We have band camp and orchestra camp in the morning. I don't want students to choose. And so we choose that break on purpose, working with other programs. There are families that reach out to me and say, hey, Christy, I'm sorry, we have vacation planned and we're gonna miss these days. We work with the families, and because we also use Alex, the online program, the families are engaging using Alex even when they're on vacation. They'll tell me, we'll do it on vacation. I'm like, okay. So they have communication with the teacher. They work with the teacher to communicate back and forth, but we try to work around their schedules. So attendance is a little hard because we know they're missing for those things that they need to be part of in the summer as well.
Okay. Also, I had a question more for Tom, because I don't think it's for them. This isn't anything you're going to probably change.
Pull your mic down.
Sorry. This isn't anything you're probably going to change, but would block scheduling be any better, like for a subject like algebra, like harder math subjects or harder science subjects?
Would it be better?
Yeah.
Well.
I mean, because like with the attendance anyway, I'm just thinking sometimes if, let's just say it's my daughter, she misses like one class and then she might not have, I don't know, whatever science class for a couple more days or something. It's those subjects are really hard, and
Yeah, you'll hear teachers in multiple subject areas argue that that the block, especially the every other day block as we do it, is counterproductive, and you'll also have teachers make the same, the exact opposite argument. So that's a debate that we are actively having. This is a multi-layer. This is a much more complicated question than.
Right, I know.
Block or not, but yes, I think you would have, especially with those students who don't naturally gravitate toward algebraic thinking.
Right.
More frequent touches from a teacher would probably serve them better. Yeah.
I would have needed it every day, so for algebra anyway. So I just wondered if you ever thought of like, grabbing those students that needed more attention and doing something different scheduling wise. I don't know.
Yeah, we discuss scheduling options regularly, and that's an active debate right now.
Oh, okay, that's it.
Other board questions? Yes, Deanna.
Well, to start off, I'm not, if I'm being honest, I always kind of tense when I open the math report because, oftentimes a lot of our students struggle with that. So it was really encouraging to see a growth that's happening among our 8th and 9th grade students, and I think is a testament to the work that you're doing. So I think that's something definitely worth celebrating. Thank you, Mr. Vukovic. You talked about the people aspect behind the work, and I think that makes sense to me. And so I'm wondering and I'm assuming you're talking primarily on the secondary level, because you're director of high schools.
Right.
Are there buildings that are doing a good job where, well, I shouldn't, are there buildings who are doing the work of, where their culture is one where the students understand, you know, what SRG means, why matters. There's buy-in from the staff. And if so, like, what contributes to that? And then in our places where that can grow, what are some of the factors preventing that growth from happening?
I'm going to be really biased in that answer.
Are you going to say North High School? Okay, can you, I know how amazing North is. I do. Are there, okay, sure, go ahead, give me that example.
Well, I think that one of the ahas that I had was every building was further along on the journey depending on when they started it. So, for instance, at North, when Matt came in and took over, culture was the issue, right? So every piece of work that was done started with culture, and so over the course of years, you have to start by addressing the issues that you have, and then laying out a fundamental plan on how we're going to grow the capacity of our staff, our students, to understand what does it mean to be a member of North High School and things like that. So being part of that, other buildings haven't necessarily, they're all in different areas of where that culture building has come and what the culture is about in those buildings. I think if you went around and talked to staff members and administrators, every building was a little bit different in terms of where they were. And I think data analysis was needed to bring up some of our inequities. We have a certain building that white students are not getting out of the park, so our overall data looks really good, but they're the most discrepant among black students and white students. And so it kind of hurts when you have to kind of peel that onion away, and so that hurts the culture initially, and then you have to rebuild it. So you have to have a plan for how you're going to first, here's what we really are from surface to guts, and here's our plan together to get it back. And I think you hit belief systems along the way, you hit culture proficiency along the way. There's so many things that teacher efficacy, like I said before, staff efficacy, student efficacy, that I actually have a say and I actually can control and change what is done unto me. All those things, it's very complicated. And so I think, here's what I can say is that every single building is undergoing it. So they're all different spots. But yes, there is and I'm not speaking from my perspective. My network team was huge in this work. I think that was probably the most important thing that we did this year, was setting the expectation that my support team, which had a special ed director on it, teaching and learning, or teacher development, curriculum, ELL, and when we went out together, so the building saw that we were all as one, and so special ed wasn't special ed's problem, or ELL's problem, that we were all responsible for every kid, regardless of, I feel like those labels just hurt, and so we just throw them away, and this is how we fix tier 1.
No, I guess I can't speak for my colleagues, but I do think when you're just inundated with data oftentimes, and we see a lot of trends from year to year, it's helpful. We can have the best systems in place, right? We can have the best initiatives, but addressing the honest, or being transparent about the issues that may be impacting that, like teacher buy-in, right? Like students not understanding the system, those are the factors that are gonna contribute to our success or not. So that's what I really value hearing as a board member, because I'm like, honestly, the data is what you guys live and breathe, but from a human level, it's like people make, the system work. And so that was really helpful. I just want to say, hearing that tonight, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, and thank you for that transparency.
Sure.
Well, and I think it was through the data analysis via the Males of Color work, is that our kids are voting with their feet by not showing up. So by looking at, if we only look at our student achievement data and we don't layer on these other things like chronic absenteeism, then you start to get down to root cause of why are kids not showing up? Well, that's a culture problem. That is not an algebra instructional problem.
Right.
And so being willing to go there and do that hard heart work, I think that's what I'm most impressed with Mike's willingness to do, is to tackle the beast, because it's the real work.
Agreed. Thank you all.
I just was very excited to hear you talk about teacher efficacy. I'm reading the collective, or the book, the Donahoe
Yep,
book.
the new
But
one.
Yes, this summer. It's on my summer reading list. I've been reading it. Because I think there is what Deanna is echoing, is the idea that when our teachers believe that they have the power to impact the change upon the students believe then that they have the power to pass algebra or physics or whatever it is, fill in the blank. And so I think that it's exciting to hear that, and I hope that our teachers feel too that they are owners in that, and that when we have these successes with students, that they're their successes as well as, led by a great team. So thank you for doing that work.
Absolutely.
Other board questions or comments? I feel like this came up last year, but I don't remember the answer. So I'm going to ask it again.
That's okay.
So summer school,
Yes.
how do we determine who participates and what are the demographics?
Good questions. So to determine who participates, that is up to the teachers to communicate to students. I really don't keep any student out. If we have a student that really wants to spend their time in summer doing math, who am I to say that they're not ready for summer math camp? I'd rather give them that opportunity. We can still make a decision at the end about what's the appropriate math placement still for them. Maybe they've made great growth, but they're still not quite ready for that pace to jump in. That could be a possibility. But we got a bunch of growth out of during the summer months, so let's capitalize on that. So the parents register the students for the summer math program. Teachers do give recommendations just to give another piece of information to the summer program teachers, but it doesn't stop a student from participating. I think I even had one year, a parent had called me and had said, hey, my son's friend got on the bus yesterday for a summer math program. Can we still get in? Absolutely. And they got in. Demographics, I have not looked at our demographics this summer yet to have that breakdown, but we can get that for you.
Other board questions? Thank you very much. I would entertain a motion to approve the monitoring report, Algebra 1 monitoring report.
So moved.
We have a motion from Dela Gardell-Shelley and a second from Deanna Langford. Any additional questions, comments? Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are approaching 8:15. Quick stretch break, bathroom break, anything? Okay, 5 minutes.
I have to go to the bathroom, thank you.
Hey, that was. but we're moving along at a pretty good pace, so. Superintendent?
This is our final Males of Color report, which if you recall, I think the first year that we had these, they weren't technically monitoring reports, but now that the board has actually created policy, this is actually a formal monitoring report, and this is, as I think all of them were tonight, as part 2 of 2, because we're using the end of year data to show progress over the course of this fiscal year. So I'll turn it over to Jake, Jomara, Allison, and our building rep, who we don't always have, but to help illustrate the good work going on at Brody, we have our vice principal from Brody here as well.
Weeks.
I'm sorry, Weeks.
That's okay.
Sorry. Brody
There's
in
10
my
of them.
mind.
You had 1 in 10 chance. So 4th report tonight, and Deb, congratulations. Feel like we should have brought a gift, and I was just telling Allison that we should have brought flowers or something, but we didn't. Sorry.
What is wrong with you people?
I don't know. Sorry.
Does luck.
But we're doing great on time until Jake started talking. Director of School Climate, and we'll introduce each other here as we go along. But last time, if you recall, you asked us to provide a secondary example, so we brought Heather with us today, provide some of the good work happening at Weeks. So just a brief over our agenda. We like to illustrate, through the response to data, some of the underlying data points, and so we'll highlight some of those examples today. We'll go over some of the changes that we have going on structurally, and then we'll end with that school example, move right into questions. So as we introduce this executive summary part, just a reminder, last time we did a report in June, which is now, it was February. We really wanted to make sure we were honing on the equity portion of this report, and so Jamar was going to walk us through that.
So we're just going to have the equity vision displayed again, because we try to do that every time we talk about our equity work, to have that in the forefront of our work. That's our anchor, and it's our ultimate goal. As you know, everything we do for equity in the district should fall into one of these 3 buckets: learning, which is the academics bucket; thriving, which is the relationships and behavior bucket; and belonging, which is our connecting with students, families, and communities. Overall, our data indicates academic growth for males of color in all grades and in almost all areas, which is a huge accomplishment. Our achievement gap did not increase this year, and as a district, to do that, it takes a lot of intentionality. Males of color increase in 4- and 5-year graduation rate, significantly positive data for males of color in supportive programs such as Flex Academy and Success. And we are very proud to have finalized an extensive analysis of our chronic absenteeism data for males of color. That was an area that we targeted this year for 9 months. And we involved diverse stakeholders in elevating their voice before we started making decisions and putting action steps in place. I am thrilled to say that we have used our equity data analysis tool throughout the process, and we will share more with you of how that turned out. And then, of course, we are planning to continue our intentional focus on equity in the district.
So for our response to data, we just chose to focus on the graduation rate. You see the 4-year graduation rate increases, and just background information, the graduation rate is given to us from the state. So this is, technically speaking, lagging data for us. We can't tell you what our graduation data was for the school year that just ended a couple of weeks ago. But some of the underlying data that we're going to share with you is FY18 data, and that will help give a good indication that we're optimistic that our rate will continue to grow, specifically for males of color. But again, we saw increases in all of our males of color groups. One of the programs that we want to talk about was Flex Academy, which is a dropout prevention program, a DOP-funded program that really focuses on blended learning, individualized supports, and it's really designed as a Tier 3 support for all students. It's currently in all comprehensive high schools, and it really has gone over a significant redesign and overhaul in the last 2 to 3 years. Some of the data out there, this would be last year's data. What you're seeing there, just to kind of give you a little bit of a definition, you're seeing credits attempted to credits earned percentage. So as students attempted a credit, this is what their earned percentage would be end of last year. For this year, we saw some ginormous, huge increases. We look at our males of color and African-American males and Hispanic males. We saw almost 40% increase in their completion rate of those credits. Again, this is for our most at-risk students, and so we feel like this is a really strong data point that supports that we'll see an increase in graduation rate in those students in the year to come. We also looked at some of our re-engagement data. As we know, as we look at students re-engaging back to the district, if we can increase that data from those subpopulations, we can also assume that our graduation rate will also increase. So we looked at our success program, which is comprehensive support for case management for families and students. We have 52 case managers in the district, and at the high school, we really focus on re-engagement for students that have dropped out. Some of our data from last year, 2017 FY. This is stick rate is students that were re-engaged and stayed engaged or stayed in school through the end of the year. So those are the certain current percentages and the number of students, specifically those males of color. For this year, we saw increases in those stick rates, so students that were re-engaged stayed at a higher percentage than they did on the previous school year.
Is that a technical term, stick rate?
Yes. I'll send you the definition.
It's in the glossary with ginormous.
All right. So Noelle talked about it a little bit, the importance of attendance. So we identified in the fall that chronic attendance was a huge issue for us, especially at the secondary level. So we have spent some time really digging into this issue. We've engaged multiple stakeholders, both internal and external partners, and now we have really developed some action steps to start to kind of dig into that chronic absenteeism. So what our data tells us is when our kids are coming to school consistently, we are starting to make growth. And what we need to figure out is what do we need to change within our system and with some of the things that Mike talked about with our culture in our school to get our kids to school consistently. So this slide just really talks about the importance of getting our kids to school every day. So what have we done? We did, and Tom and Matt and Jomara meet with a group of students monthly that represent some of our most vulnerable students. And we've really engaged them on increasing student voice in that Equity Student Advisory team. We've also met 4 times this year with community partners. We have 9 partners that we meet with to really engage them in conversations about what they see from their perspective. We also have a monthly community conversation with all of our partners where we invite them to give us feedback and we listen to everything that they need to say and really work with them on what we can do to increase chronic attendance and amongst other things.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
you probably don't want to necessarily, tell us who your community partners are. But these
sure.
are these organizations? Are these persons? Are they?
And I can send you the list. We have 90.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that'd be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
This
Absolutely.
subgroup is 9 out of the 90 that only focus on equity with us 4 times a year. So it's a subgroup we created to narrow it down to equity. So when we're talking about chronic absenteeism, all of these groups provided feedback around that topic.
Okay. So then some of the other partners are just involved in overall
General
discussion,
discussions.
and so some of them are part of the subgroup.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that
this
makes sense.
subgroup meets with us 4 times a year. Now, we sent the invite to all of our partners, and 9 of them volunteered their time. And then monthly, the 90 partners come to our community conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
There's also the SIAC committee that meets, that's made up of family and community members. And then we gave a secondary student attendance survey, and we had over 7,000 respondents from our students. We have our Wednesday, our Equity Leadership PLC. And then at the end of the year, the last Wednesday of the school year, we had a high school open student forum where we had representation from all high schools, where we got to sit down and really talk with students in a focus group, which was very powerful. We got great feedback from the kids, and I got to really talk with some of the kids on the way home, and they were so empowered by getting to sit and have Tom listen and district administrators listen. So it was great.
It was pretty cool because we got to the end of the scheduled time, and I recognized it in case anybody had to leave, but nobody wanted to leave. Everybody stuck around and talked. It was really a great conversation.
Yeah, it was great. Gosh, it was probably close to 25 to 30. I think we had about 4 or 5 at least from each high school. We had representation from Scavo as well. It was great. So we have engaged 32 community members. We have regularly over 400 building leaders and over 7,000 student voice and represented in our action plan around chronic attendance or absenteeism. So what we have identified from gathering the information is building meaningful relationships between students and teachers, ensuring curriculum relevance, and continuing to increase supports around whole child health, specifically social, emotional, and behavioral health. Those really seem to be the consistent themes when talking with stakeholders and students that we need to hone in on to start to see some positive gains with getting our kids to school regularly.
I just want to say that to disaggregate this data, it was a lot of volume, and Mary Greenstad's team worked a lot to give us these patterns that we identified throughout the groups that we worked with. And so it was a lot of time that was devoted to getting to these focused areas here.
I want to overemphasize that. We can send you the reports and just a thorough analysis. It seems like a simplified analysis of that, but there's a lot of information that came through. And so it was resounding to us that these were the 3 areas for us to focus on. Some initial action steps that we have developed that we just want to talk about briefly, and some of you have already heard about this evening. But there was a development of an initial implementation of culturally inclusive practices walkthrough tool. You talked about Project CRAVE already this evening. The creation of an attendance advisory committee, and then the creation of a district social emotional learning committee.
So the culturally inclusive walkthrough was an opportunity that was identified because, as you are aware, we have walkthroughs that focus on instruction through the Schools for Bigger work, and we felt there was a need to add equity to that walkthrough. And so the IB network developed a tool that focused on looking at equity when we do the walkthroughs. And they piloted within their network this semester and last semester, and then next year we're hoping to extend that to all networks. The indicators that we identified for that tool are going to become part of the district vision for instruction, which I'm pretty excited about. I think that's going to be a very powerful step forward for us. You have a sample there of the walkthrough areas that we focus on when we are visiting classrooms, thinking about equity. And then Project CRAVE, as Christy has mentioned, is a very exciting, groundbreaking project that is happening in few states in the nation. And actually, I don't know anybody doing this as extensively as Des Moines is. But it's a redesign of 5 major high school courses with student voice. So students are working alongside teachers and leadership teams to redesign the course structure and bring their perspective to how we structure the course. And the courses that we are focusing on this first year are Algebra 1, US History, Biology, and English 1 and 2. So if this goes well, we plan to extend this work to other courses a year from now. And that's a result of the curriculum relevance part of the findings we identified.
You said Algebra 1, Biology, English 1 and 2, and what was the other one?
It was
U.S. history.
U.S. history.
Good job, Jake.
I wrote it down. Okay, so just real quick, attendance advisory committee, this seems like a simple activity for us, but policy and practices and systems, infrastructure and actions tend to live in siloed approaches or siloed pieces across the district. So one step that we're going to take is compile attendance advisory committee to really look at how these integrated systems work together. As we dug into this problem, you can realize that a teacher taking attendance in the classroom and then how that integrates with our system when students arrive late and how that data then is transferred into early indicator system information or what users are looking at to identify need becomes a very complicated process. And then what do we do once we realize students are chronically chronically absent? You got me started on that. So that was just an example of one thing, action step we're going to take.
Probably interchangeable.
At this point, they probably are. A couple things around social emotional learning. You know, in addition to our K-5 curriculum that we have on social emotional learning that preschool talked about, some of their work that they've done as well is Right now, the Iowa Department of Education is working on social emotional bands, competency bands, and with embedded equity, we have 3 members of our team that are on that team right now developing these bands, and then myself I'll be on the Iowa Department of Education State SEL Advisory Team, where we look at those bands and then set criteria and implementation for that. And so there's phase 1 and 2 is kind of outline of what that work looks like.
Emotional safety was a huge theme in the data we collected, and when we attended the student advisory team, the monthly meetings, there was a theme throughout the year, and with the other stakeholder groups as well. So I'm pretty excited about this piece of the work.
So in social emotional, we're really talking about what students can do with competency-based instruction. Sure.
So they can support the students with that piece of the work.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about it as a curriculum area, it's just like math and reading, social emotional competencies would be another curriculum area for students, absolutely. Okay. Go ahead, Rob.
Is there a challenge to trying to do that statewide? I mean, would the social emotional needs of our kids differ?
Yeah, absolutely.
From kids in Albia?
So this, absolutely, yeah, I think kids at every school within our district would have different needs, but I think the infrastructure that the state can provide and the support for us would be helpful, and the recognition of that as a competency above and beyond what kids can't do, like behavior referrals would be helpful in terms of what data they collect and what they ask for us to do and what we're graded on. You look at the information that they ask for us around major referrals or suspension data that all the research is telling you that's arbitrary to what kids can do social emotionally. So what could be helpful from the state is for them to prioritize that. And so I think that this helps them kind of move that direction. And if we had a way to commonly report kind of what those competencies are across the state would be helpful as well.
And we have some buildings right now doing a lot of work around social emotional learning, but it's not district-wide yet. And we'd like to see it district-wide because we think as we engage with stakeholders, they need this district-wide.
One of the things that we're also looking at and doing for this next year is we have added the position of school culture, climate culture and community coordinator, so a C3 coordinator that will be assigned to each network and really partner with the director in that network. And what they're going to really focus on is breaking down those silos. We do a lot of really great work. We have success case managers, community school coordinators, bilingual family liaisons, and they don't work together as a team because they are running and there isn't that time for that system development. So this position is really going to hone in on that system development and really help kind of build that social emotional learning and all of those things and bring it together to really start to look at that culture and that system within each individual building.
And then we have added 3 equity coaches positions, and I want to thank Dr. Hart for allowing us to do that because we at first had thought of these positions as being classroom teachers with a stipend, and the more we put an equity committee together to think this through, because I want to make sure we did a thorough job thinking how this should look like to increase support at the building level. And as we talked to the committee, they suggested it should be a full-time position, a released position, so that the person will have the time that it takes to focus on the work. And Dr. Hart did allow us to change from stipend to full-time, which is a complex process, as you can imagine. So we created the position, we listed, and we hired 3 people, and we have, in collaboration with the New York Leadership Academy, we have put together a program that I am extremely excited about. We had a full week last week, 2 days with all principals and lots of different people attending. And then the last 3 days with only the equity coaches, the principals from the 4 schools, they'll be supporting the C3 coordinators and some district level people. And it went very well. We were able to do some really deep work and really envision the buildings becoming equity driven. So I'm pretty excited to see how this pilot is gonna go, because I think if we can find out how to support the building level structure, we're onto something. We have the central office and the district structure created now, the tools we need to monitor. Now, if we can figure out the building level piece, I think we're gonna see something amazing happen. So cross your fingers that this pilot pays off. We are trying to be as true as we can, and the schools that we're gonna start with are Cattell, Moulton, Hoyt, and Roosevelt.
So we are pretty excited about this.
All right, so as we mentioned in the beginning, you asked for a secondary example, and we invited Heather Ferris from Weeks to talk about the program they created.
Okay. And on behalf of you, Dr. Ahart, I do want to say that the vice principal at Brody and I look a lot alike, like Southside twins. We get called each other's names frequently.
I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. We do look a lot alike. So I'm here to talk about our Young Men of Distinction, and this is something we put together this year. Basically, we looked at data, determined the best research, and then made some connections to make some changes in our school. So the reason we started our Young Men of Distinction was that we wanted to significantly decrease the disproportionality of our Black male students at Weeks. So we were working on our school improvement plan, and our lowest group in reading in career and college readiness was our African American male boys, who were at 6% career and college ready compared to the rest of our students, which were at 34%. When we looked at growth goals met for all of our students, all of our students were at 53% meeting growth goals compared to our Black male students, which was 32%. Secondarily, we wanted to decrease our disproportionality on out-of-school suspensions, which we had been working on for some time, as well as raise some math scores. The disproportionality was not as significant there. So I, as the vice principal, kind of led our school in that effort and met with Corey Harris, our middle school director, without a really significant plan other than I wanted to increase working with parents more and our young men. And he suggested also that we work with a community partner. And so the three of us, Corey Harris and I, and Mr. Tony Wilson, who has a background in sort of relationship building and building sanctuary, we worked together. So it was the three of us, it was all three of us working together. Thank you. So we didn't really start off with a specific plan. The first thing we did was meet with the young men and then have a parent meeting. And in those meetings, we mostly just listened about what would be helpful, and really actually got a lot of positive feedback from parents about our school when we did that. So we just kind of slowly built a program based on what we thought would be helpful, including relationships with students and building that efficacy with students that, yes, we can, this does not reflect our actual skills. So when we met with them, we did a few things. We had parent meetings once every month or two. We tried for every month. Sometimes it was every other month. We did have dinner provided. Childcare was provided, but we never needed it. We also had biweekly meetings with students. We started off with the 7th and 8th grade boys together, and then eventually started meeting with them separately. And then sometimes we would be together. We also had one-on-one goal setting at the beginning of the fall semester and again at the spring semester, and that was around academics, attendance, and behavior. Students set their own goals based on what their goals were for their lives, what they want to be when they're done with school. We also, because of Corey Harris's network, we were able to arrange some field trips. All of the students went to Keystone Electric, which is owned by a successful African-American man in the community who was willing to take them on the tour and give them his thoughts. We also had some students apply for different opportunities, including a few that went to ISU to visit with some staff up there. And they also got to see Oklahoma play Iowa State, which was awesome to them. I'm a baseball fan, but I heard there was a really good player on the Oklahoma team. So how it went was this was just, I did a little work, Corey did a little work, Tony did a little work. We'd meet together and say, what do we think would help now? Let's try this. So anyway, how it went was our weeks, and I'm terrible at this, sorry. Our weeks map reading scores for Black male students. Meeting expected growth in 2017 in the spring was 32%, and then in 2018 was 65%. And in the subgroup for the middle schools, we went from ranking 10th to 1st. Our MAP reading scores for our Black male students for career and college readiness went from 6% to 32%, and that also moved us from 10th to 1st. Our week's MAP math scores for Black male students went from 59% to 57% and moved us from 2nd to 3rd. And our career and college readiness went from 13% to 14%, which moved us, we were already 2nd to 1st. Our disproportionality is at, I believe it's about 2%, compared with the overall district disproportionality is much lower, almost not disproportionate. That's for our out-of-school suspensions.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, can you explain this chart to us a little bit more? The overlapping bars are.
I can explain it to you.
Thank
So the
you.
blue bars are the percentage of attendance, so of the total population. And that orange bar is the percent of out-of-school suspensions that they make up. So for African-American students, Black students there, I can't read what the blue says, but let's just say that it says somewhere around 16% of the population is African-American males, and then they make up 18% of the suspension. So there's a 2% disproportionality between the percentage of what they represent and then what they actually produced, is what that chart. So that does that for all subgroups. Does that help? And even if this was live, you could hover over it and it'd tell you all that great information.
Mm-hmm. And our district disproportionality is significantly higher. I don't know the exact number, though. Okay, so my recommendations going forward, would that be that we would maintain this at weeks in the 7th and 8th grade. I'd like to see it added to Lincoln and East, so that, because we have discussed this with our 8th grade students who are going to be going off to high school, and our students go to either Lincoln or East. They don't all go one place. So one of the students said, you know, Dr. Ferris, we're not the only ones that need this program. And I said, do you mean in the school or in the district? And he said, in the district. So that is one thing that I would like to see happen and eventually spread. I've also done a proposal to start a Young Women of Distinction group, because I see that as the next need for our students at Weeks. So that's my information.
That's our presentation.
Board questions?
Yes.
I am so excited. I am genuinely so excited. You know, I've been on this board this is my second term, 3rd year, and I feel like a lot of the conversations that we're having they're taking fruition in the district. You know, from building the capacity to actually do this work well. And I think that's been my major critique every time we have these conversations is, are we building the capacity to do what we need to do well? And I can see now that we're building the capacity. It's really exciting to see that. It's really exciting. I think another piece that often gets left out of these conversations, thank you for the work that you're doing at Weeks, is oftentimes we leave out our parents. We're talking about our Black and brown children. I'm curious, did you have good attendance?
We always had at least 2 or 3 parents at every meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and it was different parents throughout the time. So we found that a lot of our parents were working at night, but the young men were very invested in it. So they would say, can I bring my grandma? Can I bring my uncle? Can I bring one brought his older sister. And then in different ways, we also had them. So at our celebration, we had a couple more parents that were able to come, that came to this semester celebration. And then we ended up adding our 2 or more races to the group for 7th grade at the middle of the year. And then we added a few more parents that way. So we had some parents that were very steady and there frequently, and then we had some parents that came and went. So overall, I felt good about the numbers. It wasn't, 50, but I would say we had 10 to 20 that we, and then also if there were other occasions to call, they did know what was going on. They were aware of the program if we had other reasons to talk to them as well, or at conferences, things like that.
That's awesome. Really, I'm really encouraged by the work that's happening. I'm really excited. Could you explain a little bit more about CRAVE as well?
Yeah. I could, but Noel, if you wanna
When you-
explain since it's your work.
Yeah, I can talk to it. It's the idea is to take a class, and in our case, we're taking 5 classes, and they're classes that all students need to take on their way to graduation at some point, and taking a group of teachers that teach that course, our relevant curriculum team folks, and students, and basically take the course. So all of our courses are matched with some of the Iowa core standards. Take those relevant standards, that really is the kind of the skeleton of the class, and design it with the students in order to cover the needed knowledge that they need to demonstrate, according to the Iowa core, but do it in such a way that relevance is elevated and that it's more meaningful to the students. So having the students actually co-design the curriculum for the class with the people who are going to be teaching it, so that hopefully it creates an experience that's much more meaningful and engaging for the students and relevant.
Got it. That is exciting.
It is very exciting.
I guess, so then my thought for us as board members and you too, superintendent, is now that the capacity is being built and we have these monitoring reports, we talk about a lot about a board as our focus is our outcomes. So my question is, what do we want our outcomes to be? Right now, we're measuring everything year to year, and they fluctuate so much. We don't have anything that we're measuring our progress against. And that feels like our next step, from my opinion, as a board, is figuring out what do we want our goals. We have priority areas, males of color being one of them. What are the goals that we have for our students that we want to see? What are the outcomes? So then when our monitoring reports are coming in and this work is being done, we can focus on what we need to do as outcomes.
So I would just respond to that by saying, when we talked about updating our KPIs the last time, we also talked about establishing some very specific goals that we then align ourselves to relative to progress. So that will likely be the next step that we all do together.
Something that, back to your point about how we're building capacity, that's always in the back of my mind, because I do want to see the capacity built, and I don't believe that's done by hiring people. I think it's done by integrating things into equity. And today, when I sat and heard the other reports, I could hear equity all through, and that's what we want. We don't want this report to be separate,
right?
Isolated report, but we heard equity through the reports, and we hear equity through the work every team is doing. And that to me is a celebration. When I see it, because before I didn't hear it as clearly. And now there is no question that the system is aligned around equity. And that's hard to accomplish. And so I always admire how every department has been embracing this work and taking it to heart, because it's not easy to see that happen in a system as large as Des Moines.
For sure. Can I make just a couple more things? Thank you. Oh, I think I forgot. One piece is, I know at the beginning you were talking about an assessment that a lot of your staff got put through. And I remember when we looked at the equity plan, I sensed a disconnect kind of from the board in terms of where do we fit in this space? And I know I think, was it an IDI assessment? I think it might be helpful if we took that as a board. To kind of see, especially if all the staff and administrative team have taken it.
Yes, and all the principals are almost done with it too. I think that one of the unique things we're doing, besides not hiring people but building the capacity internally, is working with equity and cultural proficiency side by side. So cultural proficiency is the personal growth, it's the skill we need to develop, and the IDI
is an amazing instrument to help people understand where they fall into the cultural proficiency continuum and what are their personal goals so that we can become an equity-driven system. The equity part of the work is the systems portion. But if you don't do the individual part, you don't get the equity outcomes we want. And so I think that's a great suggestion, and we could certainly support you with that if that's a decision the board makes.
I was about to say, right, and so I guess I'm just laying that before my colleagues as something to think about.
Wrote it down.
Yay. And then finally, to your point about cultural proficiency getting the equity outcomes. So I guess that's my question. I remember talking with you, Dr. Ahart, maybe 2 years ago when we did our big work session around the cultural proficiency handbook that had just come out. And you were pretty transparent, and I think even hearing a little bit from Mr. Vukovic tonight as well, you know, we have schools and building leaders that are at different places in terms of where they're at on that spectrum. And so my question is, because when we're talking about equity outcomes, we're talking about cultural proficiency, we're talking about anti-racism training, right? Like that's a piece of acknowledging where we're at in that system and how we view our students, consciously or subconsciously. So my question is in those C3 coordinators, is that a part of their role as well? Or who's kind of supporting our buildings as they travel along on that cultural proficiency journey?
They are actually, we have built a very intensive structure of support for the equity coaches, and the C3 coordinators are going to join us. So we're going to work together because they have to be very aligned. Although the C3 are district level and the equity coaches are building level, they all are taking their IDI next month. They'll have the debriefing with me, and we're going to have monthly sessions with them to talk about their personal growth and the systems barriers they're encountering too, so that we can try to impact those so that they have the access they need to do the work. We also have the New York Leadership Academy has a coach who will support them on the ground with observing them, coaching teachers, and providing professional development and providing feedback to them. They'll have a monthly call with him. And we also have 9 full days of professional development with collaboration with the New York Leadership Academy, that it's going to be intensively around equity. So the CP work they're going to do with me monthly, and then the equity piece, we're going to partner with them for those 9 full days. But they're going to have a lot of support. We have also developed some, I can share that with you. I didn't bring it with me, but we have developed a list of competencies that we want for these people in these positions to display. And it's an extensive list, but we have them target an area that they really want to focus on so that we can support them throughout the year. But it's been really thought through, and we have a lot of things in place for monitoring their effectiveness, for supporting them, and for helping them envision this role with us. So it's going to be pretty exciting, but the C3 are right along with us in the support they receive for their role.
And is there any temperature throughout the district? I'm sure every building can be so different. Is there any temperature on teacher buy-in to this work? Right?
Yes, what we are thinking is that we want for the equity coaches role to really align with the instructional coaching role, because we see that the instructional coaches already are embedded in the building. They have the relationships with the teacher and the buy-in, since our instructional coaching model has been extremely successful. And so we want the equity coaching model to mirror the instructional coaching model, and we want for them to tag along so that when the equity coaches move on to the next building in a year, the structure is built with the instructional coach in that building. So the instructional coach can become both. And so I think that will facilitate that relationship building, because we don't want to waste time, and we don't want to build that in isolation. So they're going to work with leaders in the building, with the instructional coach, with the community school coordinator, the C3 person, and they're going to really build a little team to be the structure. But the main goal is sustainability. So when we move them around, because we'll never have the capacity to have one in each building soon, so we want to rotate them a building capacity so that when we leave, the system is ready to continue the work, hopefully.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Additional board questions?
Yes. I don't really have a question. I just really love the work that you're doing at Weeks, and I like how it seemed very organic, and you included student voice. They made their own goals. You included the community, organizations, parents. Just seems like the perfect mix. And what I like about it is this is going to look different at every school, but you really took the time to listen to what they needed. So I think it was awesome. Thanks.
Other board questions? Yes.
I just also wanted to say that the work that you're doing at Weeks is really great. How many students was it? Did you tell us that?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
So starting off, we had a very small group in 8th grade. I feel like over the year, there were probably 8, but 8 or 9, possibly 10. But we did have some move-in, move-outs. But for the students that were there in the fall and there in the spring, there were 7. In the 7th grade, there was more like 20. So there would have been about 30. Then we added a group in the semester for the 7th grade, so that brought us up closer to like 35 or 40.
Okay. And then I know you said you'd like to see this scaled. Have there been any conversations that have started around, buildings creatively trying to meet the needs of kids organically at the building level?
Yes.
Okay.
There have been.
I figured, but yes.
And I'm actually moving to Merrill next year.
Okay.
But there are plans in place at Weeks to keep this going once
Okay.
I leave.
Other board questions? Thank you.
All right, thanks.
I would entertain a motion to approve the Males of Color Monitoring Report. We have a motion and a second to approve the Males of Color Monitoring Report. Any further discussion or questions? Please vote. Motion carries 7-0. Great. All right, the next item on our agenda is items of privilege. Any board members have any comments, anything to share?
Sure, just quick, I don't know if anybody else got this, registration brochure is out for the Council of the Great City Schools Fall Conference, which is October 24th to 28th, so just to have that on your radar, that registration is open.
Other board comments? Yes.
I know this was a later night for the entire executive team, so thanks for hanging with us and being present and for the work that you've put in, all year, but this evening as well.
Anything else? Okay. I don't have much to share. One thing I did want to remind the board of, if you'll recall when we completed the superintendent's evaluation this year, we talked a little bit about how we, along the way, begin to collect comment and or reflect back on monitoring so that we're not waiting until we get to the evaluation to do that. Cindy and I chatted briefly, and we're going to try to come up with some way that we establish a framework for individuals to be able to sort of capture some of those comments and distill some of that information so that you have it available and ready when we get ready to do the evaluation later in this, I guess, the winter of next year. So just expect that we'll be getting that since we're getting ready to move much more quickly into a variety of different monitoring reports. The other thing that I was just going to mention is this is indeed Deb's last meeting, and I did want to just again acknowledge and thank her for all of her amazing work. And we know you'll be around for a few more weeks, but again, this is officially your last meeting, so thank you for all you've done and all you will do to prepare your successor to come in and continue to support the work of the board, and we wish you well in your retirement. Absolutely, absolutely. Superintendent?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank Deb as well, and I'll quit embarrassing you, Deb. I want to recognize the work of the entire district team, but especially the folks that presented here tonight. Those 4 board priority areas have been in place, either formally in policy or articulated as an emphasis area for a few years, and we've taken that work to heart. And what you saw tonight was not the result of the work that happened over this past year. This has been disciplined, systemic work that's been taking place over a number of years. with a real serious approach by me and the rest of the leadership team in building foundations that will create sustainability and over time accelerate progress towards these board priorities. So I just want to, it's tough sometimes to work in a system, I think. Not many people are used to working in a system where we have really remained disciplined about what our priorities are, what our key levers are to increase achievement for students. It wears people out, and it's very easy when the going gets hard, as it does frequently, to say, you know what, maybe we should choose a different course that at least initially will be easier, or that really won't reach the point where we really test the wisdom of the strategy or the capability of our people or our students. And so I couldn't be more proud to work with the team that I work with and to demonstrate the results that we're getting, which I fully anticipate will begin to accelerate as we have a stronger and stronger foundation and as we have more and more folks in each of our buildings who have bought into the belief that all of our students can succeed regardless of their race, color, creed, nationality, personal experience, personal traumas, or various identities. And that if we really do have that belief and we remain disciplined to being as smart as we can about leveraging our resources, we really will help each of our students reach their potential. It's been a heck of a lot of work, and tonight's reports were just some evidence of how hard everyone and how smart everyone's been working. So thank you, everybody.
Right. Anything else? Wishing Brenda Colby well as well. Absolutely. With that objection, we are adjourned.